you, Sami, for giving us your life history. And then we would like to listen your life history because our audience are young activists and scholars. Could you say something about your family background and your study experience that will make you as a very famous activist and also scholar? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was born in North Korea in 1941, June 20, as a first son of my father, who was at the time Christian Presbyterian minister. According to the Bible, he has given me the name Samuel. The prophet Samuel was the character he wanted to realize in my life, being a theological leader or church leaders or some spiritual leaders, as Samuel was in the history of Israel people. So I was grown up in the atmosphere of very Christian setting, and I read from a young child the Bible and then memorized all the stories, and then even in my school time I tried to also preach in the churches, motivating that my father's preaching. So, and also I was taught to be very very frugal and pietistic. So that means that never drink any alcohol or smoke or dancing. So one must live like a monk, you know. My childhood was very much influenced by these Christian teachings. At the age of 5, my father moved to the China, the Manchuria near the Shenyang, in order to study further theological lessons. And then after studying the theology at Shenyang, he went to Shenyang because in North Korea at the time, the church was very much persecuted, and the theological seminary in Pyongyang was closed down by the Japanese colonial government. That was late 1930s, because the Korean Christian and pastors have refused to worship the Japanese heavenly God, which means that the emperor, Japanese emperor, they had to bow before the Japanese emperor, forced to do it, and then the Christian have refused, and then they have oppressed and then closed down the seminary. So he could not study there. So he went to China, where the Korean exile group have opened the seminary. So I lived from my age of 5 to 8. Lived in Manchuria also, so northeastern part of China, near the Shenyang. At the time it was called Bongcheon. But after liberation from Japan, 1945, Korea was divided, as you know, and then northern part of Korea was occupied by the Russian army, in southern part by the American U.S. Army. So two different systems. And even though my father graduated the seminary, he could not come back to North Korea because in North Korea, where we lived, has become the communistic side. So under the Russian military rule, was very hard the persecution of Christian religion. So he could not come back, and he waited still in Manchuria, China, he working for a Christian congregation near the Shenyang. But in 1948, the China has been also communist-sized. Mao Zedong came, and then the northeastern area has been also aggressively occupied by the Mao Zedong's communist army. Then we had to flee because Christians had no chance to survive there. And then finally, the American missionary have sent very great the aircraft from Shenyang, so we could be saved by this USA the aircraft. We flew from Shenyang to Beijing, and then went to Tianjin. We waited a month, and then they have sent a ship, big ship. So by the ship, we could come to South Korea, Incheon and Seoul. So from the age of 8, I lived in South Korea. So that was the memory of my children. And then after 2 years, that means at the 1950, at my age of 10 years old, it came out the Korean War. The North Korea has invaded, and then we could not stay even in South Korea. And then we flee to down to Daegu and Pohang areas, and it has been almost occupied by North Korean Communist Army, and then United Nations has then sent troops, and then with the U.S. and then 16 foreign countries have sent to save us against the communist aggressions. Then the South Korea could be protected enough, and then we lived on. But from that time, these war-like situations and the conflict between North and South Korea is continuing until today. So with this kind of experience of my childhood, the communism and the war and the fleeing intentions was full of my mind, and then how to get out of this conflict and tension and then anxiety and worries was in my heart from the childhood. And then in my time of the boys in the middle and high schools, of course I prepared to be also minister, so I was very loyal to the church teachings, and I decided to go to university, first study philosophy to prepare my further study on theologies. And after the graduation, I was going to the seminary and becoming minister, and then I follow my father's job. So 1959 and 60, I went to Seoul National University in the Department of Philosophy. I learned Western philosophy and religious philosophies and Immanuel Kant and existentialism, Jaspers, Heidegger's and Hegel. But during this college time, there was student uprisings and April revolutions. So as a second year college student, I participated in demonstration against the Syngman Rhee's dictatorship. And through our student revolution, this undemocratic Syngman Rhee's government has been toppled down. But democracy has not maintained. After 1 year, then military came and then with the coup d'etat. So they toppled down another, the democratic government. So since 1961, then military rule has continued long time. And democracy was neglected, and human rights and then equality or freedom has disappeared. Yeah? So then in my student time, the suffering was that how to realize democracy in Korea and how to counter against the dictatorships. So I studied some, and then another issue was that then how to make a peaceful Korea also, because of Korean War and contradictions, and then the warlike situation against North Korea. In both sides, the democracy could not be functioning. So we have to find out the way of peacemaking first, and some common life, and then if possible then unification. That was the dream of the young people at that time. So I have joined also student clubs and then discussion groups and study groups on the ideological problems. In order to solve that, we needed to know what the communistic ideology is. Why are we struggling against that? Why Korean War has come? Why Korea was divided? And the ideological conflict between communism and then capitalism. What does it mean? Why they have divided us and then so leave the Korean people in long time of war and conflict? So that was my philosophical question as a philosophy student. Then I have changed my mind that no, not theology, not the religious, because we have to solve the problem first, this ideological conflict. So I need to know what communism is, what socialism is, why we are struggling and fighting against them, and then how can we solve this conflict on Korean Peninsula. But as I said the other day, here in Korea, under the very strict law of anti-communism, even the students and professors are not allowed to read any book of communism or Karl Marx or. So even there is some books in bibliothèque, we had to get the permission from the Minister of Education in order to read this Karl Marx book. So I studied Kant, Hegel, and some of social philosophy, but could not study further in the left line ideology. So many students have got the books from outside and has read secretly. Even some people have read the books from North Korea, Juche ideologies. But when it was discovered by the police or central agencies, they are captured and they have been imprisoned. Some of my friends had to live 5 or 7 years in the prison because they have read these communistic books. That was the time in the 1960s in Korea. So I decided to go out in order to study further this ideological question and problem, and to accomplish my job for solving the unification and peace with North Korea. I should go out to study freely and then read them books and then have some critical mind of both sides. So it could, so I could have some scholarship from the World Council of Churches at that time, and I came out to Germany in 1968. So I began to study in Germany, University of Göttingen. Although I have got already master degree in Korea in Seoul National University, I needed to study some more to be a doctorand in Germany. And first in philosophy department, but later on I found that it's better to study social philosophy in social science department. So I moved to the political study department. So I have read that left Hegelian and Karl Marx, Engels, and then Lenin's, and of course with some critical viewpoint also. Then I have written my doctoral dissertation on the early socialistic line of Germany. Around the time of Karl Marx, there was many kinds of humanistic socialism also, some bourgeoisic socialism, which has been criticized by Karl Marx as a kleinbürgerliche socialism, such as petit bourgeoisic socialism. So I took an ideological thinker like the Ludwig Büchner, who tried to combine that bourgeoisic democracy with the socialistic workers' movement together. So that was one of the early socialistic movement in 1860s of Germany, at the beginning of social democratic parties. So I wrote the doctoral dissertation and received the doctoral degree of social science 1976. But since 1974 in Germany, you know, during that time, the military government of Park Chung-hee in Korea has made a new political system, Yusin system, under which he could be the permanent president. So democracy has been completely abolished, and then terrible the totalitarian dictatorship, dictatorial system was established. So we could not be silent. So from 1974 on, I have organized Korean students and workers in Germany, and then have built Forum for Democracy in Korea. So on 1st of March, I brought about 100 students and people before the Korean embassy in Bonn. We have demonstrated first. And then the organizational movement against the dictatorship, and then statements. because of this involvement, I could not come back to Korea because CIA has even intervened in my family's life, and then they have checked all of my letter which was sent to my father or my brothers and sisters, and they were also very much oppressed because of me. But I had to continue that in Germany, further democratic movement in solidarity with the outside people in Japan and USA. So 1975 and 76, I had to move around quite much to Japan and the USA. Even we have demonstrated before the US state government and White House, appealing to them the Korean democracy and human rights in Korea, and then no support of dictatorial rule. But dictatorship has continued, and until the assassination of President Park in 1979. I was going to come back right after, but then another military government came, Chun Doo-han's, after the massacre in Gwangju, 1980s. So I had to wait a couple of years more in Germany. Finally, in 1982, the CIA had said to me that now you can come back to Korea. If you are not demonstrating anymore, then you may be in Korea doing some only academic work. And at the time, my age was already 40, because I had to live in Germany for 13 years because of the long dictatorships. And my two children have become already 14 and 15 years old, and they could not speak Korean, and they spoke only German, and I was going to make them Korean. So let's decide to come back to Korea for the future of children, and also some new kinds of involvement of me as we fought successfully against the Park Chung-hee's Yushin dictatorship. Another dictatorship will maybe continue some more years, but we will involve in democratic movement in another way. So I came back to Korea. So from the 1982, I have been appointed as a professor of philosophy at Sungsil University in Seoul, which is a Christian university. But at first the CIA has called me, and they have investigated me over 10 days, and then tried to find out whether I had some connection with North Korea or some communistic movement. But I didn't have any contact and then my ideology was rather the social democratic, not the communistic. So they allowed me to teach. From the early 1980s, I was in Korea. Then I have been involved in peace movement, because so long as we are divided, and fighting against North Korea and militarizations and then confrontation under the commandership and leadership and auspice of the United States, there's no chance to come to unification or peaceful life in Korea. I have been very much active in then many lectures on peace movement. Johann Galtungs and Dieter Sengers and European peace research and ideology I have conveyed, and then wrote books. So I had quite many lectures in the years around churches and YMCAs and YWCAs and student movement. So it has continued until we have reached the democratization in 1987. And then after that I could be more free, and then from the oppression and some surveillance to be more active. Then I could participate in some civil society movement in 1990s on. I have been involved with the organizing PSCD, People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy, which is now largest NGO movement in Korea now, which has over 20,000 members who pay the monthly fees. So which has now more than 70 full-time staffs. PSPD. So I was the first chairperson of the steering committee of this PSPD, and another comrade of the organizer, Secretary General at the time, Mr. Park Won-sun, is now the mayor of Seoul City. It is now. So many friends become the minister, and then so after democratization, so involved that, and then sometimes I helped some Democratic Party as an advisor or some policy advisors, but my scholarly work in the university was mainly in philosophy department, and then I have organized the study institute of philosophy and society, and I became also president of the Korean philosophical societies, but my work was concentrated on the philosophy, social philosophy on the peace, especially peace and justice. My involvement in civil society was very much concentrating on the peace and unification movement. And then I joined also the Unification Committee of the National Council of Churches, which has initiated also People's Peace Movement. We have issued a very important statement, 1988, the Peace and Unification Mission of Korean churches. The policy party I have drafted. There already I have written in 1988 also, in order to accomplish the peace and unification, we need to accomplish the peace systems, which means that the peace agreement between North and South Korea that is to replace the armistice agreement 1953, and then recognition of mutual identities, and then with the boundaries, like in Germany, two states with the one nation. So this theory I have developed and I've written. So since then I have been involved very much peace movement. And then finally in the year of 2000, Korean government, we had already done democratic government, has been committed by the UNESCO to open UNESCO Institute, Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding. So they have seek for the first director who can direct this Asia Pacific Regional Institute for Peace Education and Education for International Understanding, which is aiming to bring that teachers training of 46 countries in Asia Pacific. So we had to do it all in English also. So I was appointed from the year 2000 as first founding director of this Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding. Then I had to visit so many countries in Asia Pacific. You know, I have been involved from the early 1980s in ARENA, and we had, of course, very many meetings annually. But from the year 2000, because of my involvement in Asia Pacific UNESCO work, I could not come to ARENA meeting because of my time. I had to travel more than 15 times foreign travel in the year. So all around in Asia Pacific, in the island Pacific countries. So we have developed also some teaching textbooks, materials for peace education, human rights education, and then international understanding, also multicultural understandings. I was going to come back after this 4 years founding directorship, but right after that, then I was called to the the Korean National Association for UNESCO. As the Secretary General, so I had to continue UNESCO work 4 years again. And then I continued also many educational and cultural work of UNESCO as with the position of Secretary General of Korean National Commission, which is coordinating many ministries' educational and cultural work internationally. Then I had to retire, you know. Because my age reached already more than 68 years old. I have retired, and then I have organized another civil society movement, the Eco-Peace Asia. Eco-Peace Asia, which is involved in the anti-desertification movement. So we have planted trees and then some greens on the desertification of Mongolia and China in order to protect against the dust and then this and dry the desert. Yeah, so then suddenly the Korean government has made another UNESCO Institute in 2012, that's Asia Pacific Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage. And they seek for the founding Secretary General who had some experience in UNESCO and international works. And at the time, my age was 70. And then I was called again to the UNESCO, so I had to serve the 3.5 years as a first founding Secretary General of this newly Asia Pacific Center for the developing, promoting the intangible cultural heritages. So I had to also travel quite much in Asia Pacific, 47 countries, and just 2 years ago, 2015, I have stopped. I have retired from this job. And that means I have served 3 UNESCO organizations within 12 years, continuously. So since then I'm now free and then more involved in civil society movement. I was a chief representative of International NGO History NGO Forum for East Asia, for Peace of East Asia, which has some annual international meetings. And now I'm also president of the Korean Christian Cooperation for Social Development, and advisor for the PSPD, and then also since last year I became also another chairperson of the Forum for Democracy and Peace, which has been very much involved in the candlelight civil society demonstration, and now also in the peace and movement against the Assad deployment. So I visited the USA last April as a delegation of this civil society to protest against the deployment of Assad and some for reform movement of the Korean democratic policy in the new government. Yeah, so that is roughly my about 76 or 7 years life I have described. Yeah.
Could you explain more what is the turning point in your life, and also how did you meet your wife, Tsui? Because she also is a very artist and also activist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as I said that I was born in the Christian family, so my youth life was almost religious life, and I determined to be the minister and theological maybe scholar following my father's job. So until the college student, I think I was very much involved in this religious philosophy studies and the Christian student movement. But this 1960s, 61, the military coups and then military dictatorship has given the opportunity of changing my life, and I could not just stay and then observing, looking around at this worsening democracy situations, and especially in maybe that very very principal the change of my mind, well, first change of my mind from the religious concern to social philosophical concerns. That was in my college time. And then I went to Germany and studied further philosophy. But 1974, as the Yushin dictator came, the democracy in Korea completely destroyed. Then I had to make my mind to be involved in democratic movement, not only the academic researchers. So philosophy researcher on being democratic activist, that is a quite big difference. But I had to change my mind and determine mine. So from 1974, so long as this undemocratic dictatorship continuing in inland Korea, I cannot go back. And I had to live my life, maybe until my death, outside to save the democracy in Korea. As it was the life of the students who, in the Japanese colonial time, there were many in Japan and Shanghai and then who fought against the Japanese colonialism outside. They had freedom to do it. When they come back, they cannot. They can go only to the prisons. So I had to read that how our seniors have lived during the time of Japanese colonialism. They have fought against, and some of them have never come back to Korea and died in China or Japan. So I had to decide myself, so long as dictator Park lives 80 years or 90 years old, then I should stay in Germany, maybe I should die here. So it was a very hard decision, because I had to be a leader of that with my names. Not only just participate in one or two demonstrations, but I had to organize that, and then some pressure works through the written letters to the United Nations, USA, and then Chancellor of the German government to appeal to the international public for democracy in Korea. So that was, I think, was quite a big, important turning point for me. And then I had to fight almost 10 years in living in Germany, involved in democratic movement. Of course, in between I had to written my dissertation and received doctoral degrees, and I could not teach there, so I had to open a social counseling office for the Korean workers with the help of German churches. So I have become the social counselor for Korean coal miners and then hospital nurses to help them with German language and then German law, the workers' laws, and then if they have some problem, I had to bring them to the lawyers and then the labor court and administration court to protect their life in Germany and their workers' jobs there. So I had to work as a social worker 5 years or so, until I come back to Korea 1982. So I think that was my very difficult time, but very memorable. I have written a book recently in Korean of these stories some 40 years ago of my time in Germany in the 1970s, how I have been involved in democracy movement and then social working actions for Korean workers. I met my wife very early in the college time. When I was a sophomore, second year, and my wife was first year of Ewha Women's University. And one day I came to the English Bible study group of Dr. Scofield, who is very famous patriot for the in the time of Japanese colonialism, as a Canadian missionary who has been very much supporting Korean Korean independence movement. He was very old and he retired and came back to Korea again, and then he teaching in Seoul National University. He has opened English Bible class to teach and to encourage Korean young people. So I went regularly there, and then once I met some students from Lee Women's University there, and we were at first in different groups, but later on we decided to unite these two groups, men and women students groups, so we could meet once a week in English Bible studies and discussing in English, and so we have known quite several years after that. We were concerned for more these social concerns, and then the church works and well, then love stories.
Could you tell us more?
Yeah.
The love story.
Love stories. Well, and she became after she graduated Ewha Women's University, she studied education there, then became the middle school teacher. And we have Dr. Scofield has opened, helped some night school for those who could not come to the normal schools. There was some voluntary service of the students, and then we were asked her to serve the voluntarily, and my wife and I have opened some Sunday school like there, and then we have been involved that kind of some social service from the student time. So that was the opportunity to meet the girl student. Otherwise, at the time, it was very difficult to meet any girl student. The Confucian culture means that the separation of man and wife, man and woman. We were taught that from the age of 7, the boy and girls should be separated, can never meet together. So we were educated that way. So in my time of college student, 1960s, they had surveyed once, and then more than half of the students have never met any girl student, dated or drinking a coffee or eating, and then no opportunity, and they haven't grown up like that. So until according to their parents' life, so separations. But I was lucky to find her very early because of this English Bible studies through that kind of activities. Yeah, so she liked me, and I helped her also in her studies, and then we, as we had so many chances to meet, then could be a friend, and then also in loving affairs. Then I married her at 1966, but I had to go to Germany alone, and I left my wife and children over 2 years. And later on, she came to Germany and left her children to my parents. So I had to stay away from my children 4 years, and she and 2.5 years, and then we joined in the year of 1972 first. So and then democratic involvement, and could not come back to Korea.
How about your family? your father, brother, sister all support you?
But since I left my home to study in Seoul, and then my parents were ministering in the local areas, so I was more or less self-sustaining with scholarships and then earnings, and then I was lucky to receive scholarships from the World Council of Churches and then Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Germany. So my study could be supported by these scholarship institutes. I have, of course, 2 brothers and 3 sisters. My young brother came to Germany also, who has studied the music, who has become the singer, the German lead singer, Beethoven and Schubert's. And my youngest brother came, he has become the Christian pastor, theology, also received the doctoral degree in Heidelberg University, and he's still serving Korean churches as the General Secretary of Diaconia Centers. Yeah, one of my sister has become the organist, the pipe organist, and playing the organ in the churches. And another one teacher. So, yeah. So, my family life.
How about your father? Can he accept that you become an activist?
He was very sorry that I gave up that theological studies. And also becoming very much political. We had some problem, and then he wrote me that please come back, and then so be patriotic citizen, and then we had to suffer under Japanese colonialism, even in dictatorship, so we are happy, so you should come back. And then, but I could not come back, so I had to live outside 13 years, and my mother has waited so long. She wanted to see me before she dies, and then once I tried to come back, but it was not possible. After 13 years since I left Korea, I could for the first time see my mother and father in 1981. But they all died now. My mother and father died. But later, when I became that professor of Sungsil University, Christian University, and also I have worked quite much for the churches as layman and ecumenical movement, and I became later that executive committee of World Council of Churches in Geneva. I served also as a layman quite much to church, and then lectured many times in theological seminary before the pastors, and then with social concerns and peace issues. And then my father was very glad to see that. And then finally, maybe your job is all right. So you are not preaching like me, but you can still teach pastors and the Christian laymen and more influence to the citizens and people. So he was very, very satisfied. But finally, his third son, my youngest brother, he made him to be a follower and then pastors, theological pastors.
Could you tell us the most happiness moment, the most happiness moment in your life?
Well, that's every moment is my happiness. If I am healthy and then well, successful life, but some special happiness I felt that when the dictatorial regime was toppled down, and when I could come back to Korea after 13 years and to see my mother and father face to face, I think that was the unforgettable time. I have that picture at the time and then hanging in the wall. So we cried and cried in the airport, but we were so much thankful for that opportunity to be able to see each other and come back. At the time in 1970s, it was very, nowadays so many flights and telephone and then communication possible, but even the communication, telephone was so much expensive. If I speak over 3 minutes, it costs more than $30–40. So maybe once a year I could talk. Oh, my mother, I am all right. So, but we have written every week a letter. So we could communicate only through letters. With my father and mother and my brothers and sisters. But I had to live very alone outside of Korea. That was very difficult time. But I was so happy to be able to come back with my family and children.
How about your children? They all support your activism?
Not very much. They lived also some 10 years in Germany. So at the age of 14 and 15, they had to come back without knowing the Korean language. It was so hard and difficult. And they were well accustomed to live in Germany from kindergarten, so they freely, so German, and they claimed and then they criticized why we should come back Korea, and then we would like I have so many friends and good schools here. They wanted to stay longer, but no, come back. You are Korean. You must live. You cannot be a German citizen. So it was very hard for them to be adapted to Korean situations. First 2-3 years of language learning, and then could not follow the other students in the schools. But later on, they have survived and finished could enter the university and then finish. But my daughter found a way that she utilized her knowledge of German language, and then after college in Sungsil and Seoul National University, she went to United States, America, and she graduated Yale University in German literature. And she has become a professor of German linguistics in Boston now, and married also one second generation Korean boy who had studied also in Yale University, majored comparative literature. So he is also a professor of Emerson University in Boston. So they have also got one child at the age of 42, very late. My grandson Tobin is now 7 years old. So I was very happy also to find that my daughter could bear one child at the age so late. So that was maybe my second happiest time. Yeah.
How about your son?
My son has studied also at first the German language, but later on he found more interesting that Oriental medicine. So he came to Nanjing and graduated Chinese medical schools and became the Chinese medicine medical doctors. So he's doing some acupunctures and then some medical works also.
So he stay in China now or
In Korea.
Korea?
Yeah, in Korea. That's
So and then do you have any future plan?
Well, so I have lived already my life, most of that active time. So I don't know how long I can live more, but I think now I have retired from this active life. Some 23 years of university professorship, and then some 12 years of UNESCO directors and secretary generals. I'm now serving only some NGO or movement, and then one a Christian organization for social development. But my hope, wish is that contributing to the peaceful unification of both Korea. And during my time as Secretary General of UNESCO, I could visit some more than 6 times in North Korea. I had also good contact with the people there, and then UNESCO workers. So when the time comes, then I will come to Korea, North Korea again, and to help them. And then the exchanges and the communication work with the North Korean people. There are many misunderstandings, and then so well, the relationship between North and South Korea has been very much worsened. So maybe the reconciliation and then communication and then cooperations with North Korea, that should be and must be my last hope, and maybe contribution if that kind of contact and cooperation would be available. I think I will do my best for that. So to help North Korea and then make the relationship better toward coexistence, and also, if possible, unification of my country. Yeah.